Simplify Science Selects lecture on same difference. Albert Einstein said the difference between stupidity and genius is that genius has its limits. So our learning goals: students should be able to classify an organism into a kingdom, classify a cell into a kingdom, compare and contrast kingdoms, and recognize biodiversity. What we already know: we know that organisms are sorted by their properties, that there were 6 different kingdoms, and that dichotomous keys helped us classify. In the lab, we really looked at the 6 kingdoms of life. We were able to classify them by their cellular properties, and then see how large a diversity there was in the animal kingdom. Now, this is looking at 7 of the 8 levels of taxonomy. This already is looking in domain Eukarya. So what this is doing for us is in kingdom Animalia. There are all kinds of organisms inside kingdom Animalia, and they all have something in common. They all have animal cells that have, a cell membrane and a nucleus and mitochondria and all the different things that make animal cells animal cells. And there's all kinds of different things in here. We have wolves, we have common dogs, we have foxes, we have bats, we have bears and sharks and cats and spiders. All kinds of different things. Now, if we move down a level to phylum Chordata, only some of the animals are in phylum Chordata. The other ones are in a different phylum, but everything in Chordata is also part of Animalia. So in Chordata, we also find our wolf and our dog and our bat and our fox and our bear, and we find our cat and we find our shark, but we don't find our spider. Our spider is in a different phylum. It's an arthropod. So our next down is class Mammalia. The mammals. There are all kinds of different chordata. Some are reptiles, and some are birds, and some are fish. But these, in this grouping here, are mammals. Our wolf, our bat, our dog, our fox, our bear, our cat, but not our shark. Our shark, that was a member of the phylum Chordata in the kingdom Animalia, is in a different class. That's not Mammalia. If we go down to the order, this order is Carnivora. In Carnivora, our carnivores, we find our wolf, we find our dog, our fox, our bear, our cat, but we don't find the bat anymore. In family Canidae, now we see our wolf and our dog and our fox, but we no longer see the bear. We no longer see the cat. We move down to the genus. Now we're getting, the genus is the very smallest grouping. So we see our wolf and our dog, but we no longer see our fox. We're looking at the genus that's called Canis. These 4 right here are very closely related. They have a lot in common with each other. They're very very similar to each other. Now, when we looked up at our kingdom Animalia, everything in the kingdom Animalia had some things in common. They were all animals with animal cells, and they shared similarities, but they do not have quite as close of a similarity as these organisms do to each other. Now, if we move down to the species Lupus, we get enough information to specifically name my wolf. Canis lupus. So all these levels are nested inside each other. It's important to remember that the creature is in all of those categories. So there are several things that we look at to classify. Traits like the organization of the cells. Does it have a nucleus or not? How many cells is this thing made out of? Just 1 or hundreds? What environment does it live in? Does it have a cell wall or not? Where do they get their energy from? Do they have to eat things to get their energy, or can they get it from, say, sunlight? How do they reproduce? Do they reproduce by themselves, or do they have to find a mate? Can they move? All of these things would be useful information to figure out what kingdom they go in. So let's look at the prokaryotes. So what prokaryote means are any cells that have little to no organization inside them. These are the smallest kinds of cells and the simplest kind of cells. Because they're so small, they don't need to be as organized. It's not as hard for them to find what they need because they're just not that big. So these are our two kingdoms, Archaeobacteria and Eubacteria. Those are two kingdoms that have prokaryotes in them. My other four kingdoms have eukaryotes, like you and I. They have a greater level of organization. They need more organization because they're bigger. Now, when I say organization, I mean they have these little organelles in them. These organelles are places where a specific thing happens. Like in the nucleus, that's where DNA goes. In the chloroplast, that's where photosynthesis happens. Everything has a place. That's why the cells can be bigger, because they have these little organelles for things they put things in. The most common thing to look for is the nucleus, because it's so large. We can see the nucleus under a microscope. Some of these other organelles we need a more powerful piece of equipment to see them. Our four kingdoms, Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, and Protista, are all made out of eukaryotes. So if we know if the cell has a nucleus or not, meaning is it a eukaryote if it has a nucleus, and if it doesn't have a nucleus, it's a prokaryote. That will automatically tell us, does it go in the two kingdoms, Archaeobacteria and Eubacteria, or does it go in the four eukaryotic kingdoms, Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, and Protista? Now, the number of cells is important. So if it's a single-celled organism, that means it's usually one of the three Archaeobacteria, Protista, or Eubacteria. Those three are usually single-celled. Rarely there will be some fungi that can be single-celled, but it's pretty rare. The most common one we see is yeast. But usually Archaeobacteria, Protista, and Eubacteria are all single-celled. Now, multicelled, we'll always see Animalia and Plantae as multicelled. Usually we'll see fungi, except for that rare exception I noticed, and rarely we'll see Protista. It's pretty uncommon for Protista. And then we'll also see what's called colonial. Now this one's a little more confusing. Single-celled and multicelled is pretty obvious because you either have one or a bunch. Colonial means you have a bunch of individual cells, but they stay together with each other. They're still independent of each other, but they band together to a colony. So they do offer some support. There's safety in numbers, but there's still a difference. So this is, sometimes we'll see Archaeobacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, or fungi, but each of those is only sometimes. So in a multicellular organism, different cells have different jobs. For example, in humans, muscle cells do a different thing than brain cells do. They're specialized. Colonial cells are all the same kind of cells as each other. In a colonial organism, you basically have a whole bunch of single cells that are just stuck together with each other. Now, our environment can also give us clues about what kind of kingdom it might be in. Particularly Archaeobacteria tends to be in extreme places. If you ever hear them talking about how harsh the environment is, like maybe the deep sea at the bottom of the ocean, or in a salty lake or a volcano, or inside of our own intestines, they're commonly giving you clues that it's going to be an Archaeobacteria, because Archaeobacteria have special adaptations to live in those places, and a lot of the other kingdoms cannot live in some of the places Archaeobacteria can. Eubacteria is found all over the place. They're the most prolific of the kingdoms. They're found in almost every environment, but they particularly like places that are oxygen rich and moist. Protista. Protista we find pretty much any place we have water. Protista like to live in water and they're aquatic. Fungi, it varies where the fungi is, but because fungi don't move, we usually find them growing on a food source near air and water. Like on a decaying tree, or on in the dirt where there might be some nutrient-rich soil, but they have to grow on their food source. Plantae needs access to carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. And Animalia, we'll see them go anywhere they can find oxygen and water. Whether or not a cell has a cell wall or not can give us some clues too. The cell wall is a rigid, thick barrier that goes around the cell membrane. Now, some people frequently get confused that they have a cell wall instead of a cell membrane, and that's not the case. It's in addition to. It's made out of cellulose. So we always see cell walls in plantae, fungi, archaeobacteria, and eubacteria. It can occur in Protista. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Protista likes to be like that. Protista is always difficult. There's few things that are always true in Protista. It's all over the place. The one category where we never see cell walls is Animalia. Now the reason for that is because Animalia doesn't need the rigid, thick structure to surround the cells, because animals have skeletons. We have specialized skeletal cells which support our body, so our individual cells don't need their own support. Plants don't have skeletons, for example, neither do fungi or bacteria, so they need the rigidness of the cell wall to support them. Underneath that cell wall, or the only thing around the cell in Animalia, is the membrane, the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. It's very thin. It's made out of proteins and lipids. It's a bilayer. All cells have membranes. There are no cells out there that don't have a membrane. It's selectively permeable. What permeable mean is that things can go through it. But selectively permeable means only some things can go through it. For example, water can move across the plasma membrane pretty easily. But other things like bacteria can't get into our animal cells easily at all. But water comes right in. Now, whenever we talk about food sources, some organisms we classify as autotrophs. Auto means it happens automatically. So some things can produce food from sunlight. This happens inside the organelle called chloroplast. So it removes carbon dioxide from the environment, and it uses the sunlight to bind it together into sugar. All plantae do photosynthesis. All plantae are autotrophs. Some eubacteria, archaeobacteria, and protista can do this, but some don't. So some of them have chloroplast, but most don't. Now, if you're not an autotroph, you still need energy. So heterotrophs are things that have to consume food and actually put things into their mouth to get energy into their organism, or whatever way they absorb it. Fungi don't have mouths. So all Animaliae and fungi are heterotrophs. All of them. Animals and fungi all have to eat. Most archaeobacteria, protista, and eubacteria have to eat, but some of them can do autotrophy. Now it's pretty rare that plantae can be heterotrophs. For example, the Venus flyplant. But even the Venus flyplant still does mostly photosynthesis. It can just do both. So let's look at a developing question. What is a simple way to tell archaeobacteria and eubacteria apart? Well, probably the easiest way would be their environment. If it comes from a very unique or crazy place, probably archaeobacteria. That would be one example. Let's look at a proficiently level question. Which kingdom does this belong to? Justify your answer using the CLEAR method. Remember, that's claim, evidence, and reasoning. What is the reason that your evidence supports your claim? I'll give you a second. Okay, I'm going to make the claim that this is a plant cell. My evidence is the presence of cell walls, nucleus, and chloroplast. So my reasoning that that evidence supports my claim that it's a plant cell is that since it has a nucleus, it can't be archaeobacteria or eubacteria. So I cross those off the list. The fact that it has a cell wall means it can't be an animal. The fact that it has chloroplast means that it can't be a fungi. So what is left for us is Plantae. Okay, let's see, what kingdom does this belong to? Now this isn't a drawing anymore, this is actually a photograph taken through a microscope. Alright, well let me think. I can see a nucleus, so this must be a eukaryote. Can't be either archaeobacteria or eubacteria. I see that it doesn't have a cell wall. I only see a plasma membrane, so it can't be fungi or Plantae because those all have cell walls. Now, some Protista don't have cell walls, and animals don't have cell walls. So this looks like an animal cell. Okay, so asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, a single organism can become two, either through budding or breaking off and regrowing. Now, whenever we do asexual reproduction, the offspring has the exact same DNA as the parent. So all eubacteria and archaeobacteria reproduce this way, and most Protista do. Sometimes fungi and Plantae will do it, but not if they can help it. And it's pretty rare to see it in Animalia. It's a last-ditch kind of effort kind of thing. Sexual reproduction is when you need two parents to produce offspring. This almost always happens in Animalia and very frequently in Plantae and fungi, very rarely in Protista. Sexual reproduction is preferred because of all the extra genes you get from having two parents. Whether or not they can move tells us a lot about the organism too, because Animalia, Protista, Archaeobacteria, and Eubacteria have some method of locomotion. Locomotion means movement. Plantae and fungi do not move. They specifically live in places where what they need is there. Animalia, Protista, Archaeobacteria, and Eubacteria will go to where they need to be. Okay, let's look at a proficient level question. A scientist discovers a single-celled organism in the jungle and is trying to figure out which kingdom to classify it into. He watches it moving under the microscope and is able to see a nucleus inside the cell. Which kingdom should the scientist look at first to classify it into? Okay, well, let's just start with the evidence as we have it. So, single-celled, that automatically rules out Animalia and Plantae. Those are not single-celled. So, let's see, it's moving. Okay, well if it's moving, it can't be fungi. So we've ruled out Animalia, Plantae, and fungi. And let's see, we see a nucleus. If we see a nucleus, it's a eukaryote, so that means we can rule out Archaeobacteria and Eubacteria. The only option left is Protista. Okay? Mastery question. With the information in this image, and this is a real picture, which kingdoms are still valid for classification? What additional information could we seek out to narrow down the list to one kingdom? Okay, well, I see, first of all, that this is a multicellular organism, which means it's not archaeobacteria or eubacteria. It's also probably not Protista, because this doesn't look colonial. But also notice that those little dots there, those are nuclei. That's a nucleus. So that further says that it's not archaeobacteria, eubacteria. We already knew that. So, those look like cell walls around it there. They're awfully thick and, pretty well structured. I think those look like cell walls. See how thick the lines are? So I think that that cell wall there means this can't be Animalia. So this is either fungi or plantae. Now, if we had more information, say if we had enough information to say, does it do photosynthesis or not? That would be enough to tell us what kingdom it will go into.